So over the last couple of Linux videos, I've been really avoiding the elephant in the room, and that is Linux hardware compatibility. So this is just a quick video of my experiences with Linux hardware, which generally have been good, especially recently, unlike 20 years ago or more where it was somewhat more painful. But these days it's a lot better, and I really don't have a lot of hesitations putting Linux on pretty much anything within reason. So I installed Linux on this computer recently. This is the AMD 2600, which I have used in previous videos. I didn't even think about it too hard. I grabbed a copy of Fedora, and I was installing a lot of different operating systems at the time, but I grabbed my copy of Fedora and put it on there without really worrying about it at all. I was fairly confident it would work, at least to some extent. It did not, actually. Not easily, not straight up, because it had an NVIDIA video card in it. I went, oh, it has an NVIDIA video card, which I'm sure I could have got working, because lots of people do, but I did not even bother. So what I did is I just immediately pulled it out, because I've got a Windows machine downstairs. It's a gaming machine, and that 1060 NVIDIA 1060 will go quite lovely in that, even though I put it in this case because it was a white case, it was a white video card. I took it downstairs and put it in the machine downstairs. I pulled the, what is it, a 570 AMD out of that computer, and even though it is black, and whacked it in this computer. And then I installed Linux, and of course it was absolutely problem free. It was only just the installer, it was hanging on the installer for some reason, maybe it's something to do with Wayland. And I just didn't bother to try and worry about it at that time. So it just installed Fedora perfectly fine. Admit it's a wired connection. That was no problem. I think it's a Realtek whatever network, and had no problem with that. So anyway, that install went fairly problem free, except I didn't have any sound coming out of the HDMI, out of the speakers on the monitor. I did install another version of Linux, I can't remember what it was, and it worked fine. So I knew it wasn't really a Linux problem so much as something to do with Fedora. I later found out that it was just a matter of changing a setting in the sound configuration there, and it worked fine. But I didn't, and again, I don't know if this is just because I've been using various things over the years and just get used to just swapping hardware. I just put on some analog speakers instead. And didn't worry about it. The analog speakers are better anyway, obviously, for the long run. But temporarily I thought, oh, I'll just use the monitor sound, and then it didn't work. So anyway, that was just an easy fix. So in general, that worked quite well, and I didn't have any trouble with that. I immediately printed to the printer downstairs, which required very little setup. I even managed to just open up the scanning software and was able to use the scanner downstairs. So you're going to think, Linux, what's the problem? That went fairly well. It worked on all the software, mouse and keyboard and all that worked, and what's the problem? But of course, I've been using Linux off and on for years, so the Brother printer downstairs, I'm sort of used to using buying Brother, or I think HP is another one. And I've had the Brother for quite a few years because I know they work well with Linux, and so I've had that experience in the past, and it sort of sits in the back of your mind that I'll just grab them because they've worked for me in the past. To be fair there, it could have gone far worse if I had some other brand of printer or some other services, and even my Logitech mouse worked, but of course it would, because it's got the configuration is stored in the mouse, and of course I don't have any software that would actually work on there, but it's already pre-programmed from Windows, so of course it works fine. But the NVIDIA thing really is a thing. I mean, there's a reason Linus Torvalds, that is, isn't real keen on NVIDIA. and I mean, I've used NVIDIA cards over the years, and like this time I had some trouble with it, but I have used it in the past. The driver issues are significant enough that, you know, like for like, I'm going to probably pick AMD over NVIDIA. But it doesn't mean I'm not going to buy NVIDIA, especially for my Windows machines, and possibly even use Linux on them. So I don't think it's a major hassle, but it's something that certainly would tip me towards AMD if there's nothing else really compelling about the NVIDIA card. CPUs and motherboards, generally I haven't had, like chipsets and whatnot, I haven't had a lot of trouble with Linux in a very long time. I'm fairly confident when I install Linux on a desktop or a laptop that the majority of things are going to work, especially even with sound. Wired networking is usually fine, certainly not CPU, memory, motherboard, chipsets. Any problems there are usually fixed fairly quickly, but I have not had any problems with those in a very long time. Then, as I say, I am mostly using a wired network, and they are fairly robust. I haven't even had any trouble with webcams really, because I just put that cheap webcam on there when I installed it, well, after I installed it, and it just worked out of the box, and I haven't had any trouble with that sort of thing lately. I've even got like my little cheap microscope that I use. I use this sometimes for, actually I use this even for reading writing on really small items that are very hard to read, and for looking at various things. It was like 20 bucks on eBay, and I use it for looking at numbers on chipsets and things, because my eyes are terrible, and sometimes it's easy to use that because then I can photograph it and use it for video or whatnot. So that's quite a handy thing, and it just plugs in. I just use that same as I would a webcam, and I run it through OBS or whatever, and no problems at all. Printers certainly can be a problem, and I've had plenty of troubles with that over the years. I imagine it's better now, but I'm already in a bit of a rut, and I will only buy certain types. At the moment I've got like a multi-function brother thing that's got printer and a scanner, apparently a fax as well. I don't know anyone who actually uses the fax. I haven't used a fax in a long time, but it's one of those printer MFC laser things, whatever, and it just ran off the cuff. And I imagine there are a lot of things out there that don't run, but then it's really, if you are buying hardware, if you're installing Linux and you've got a bunch of hardware already, then that's where you're going to have problems. But when you're looking for hardware, especially just ordinary normal office hardware, you just look for things that are going to be compatible, and that really isn't that hard. Of all the things I have had trouble with, even recently and over the years, and that is Wi-Fi. And of course, if it's a laptop and the Wi-Fi is built in, that can be a real pain. If the Wi-Fi doesn't work, it does mean using a dongle or something, or using a wired connection. Generally, I have had a couple of laptops over the years that just didn't work. And I've just put a Wi-Fi dongle in them to get them to work, but I haven't tried recently with recent machines, and I imagine it is better. But even today I found a couple of Wi-Fi dongles that I had laying around, and this is some little cheapie, like I can imagine anyone just down the local electronic shop, they're just going to, oh, I need a Wi-Fi dongle for some computer or laptop, or that doesn't have built-in Wi-Fi. You might just buy a little cheap dongle and just plug it in the machine. That one there, let me try LSP, no, not PCI, USB. It is recognized. It gives me what it is there, Asus dongle, but it is not giving me any connection to the local Wi-Fi network. So that just doesn't work. There's probably a way of working around with the Linux kernel modules to get that working, but I just don't bother, and it's not a very good dongle anyway, so I don't even know why I got that. I probably was away somewhere one time and needed a dongle very quickly for some machine and bought it. That's not a dongle. There's another one. This is the one I bought from my wife's machine, which I now have. I moved most of the machines downstairs that were on Wi-Fi to PCI cards, the desktops, because I just found USB dongles, especially on Windows, to be just a pain. That they really just don't work. I don't know how they are using them full-time on Linux. They probably are a little bit better, but they're terrible on Windows. But this one here I bought for, this wasn't cheap. I don't know, this is a Netgear one I bought for my wife some time ago, and she was using it for quite a while. What does it do? It comes up as a Netgear A6210, and if we go have a look, we do get connection to the Wi-Fi network, so that one works. And I must admit I'm a bit like that with hardware. I've got a lot of hardware laying around, so for me it's not a big issue. But otherwise, if you've got a machine and you need some sort of hardware like that, you're going to go and do a Google search. One thing, we do live in a time where you can Google search particular items, look them up and say, oh, online, and say, oh, that's a nice looking piece of equipment. I might get that. Let me just check if it will what the compatibility is like on Linux. So we live in a time that does make that a lot easier. If it's an internal Wi-Fi, you may be a bit annoying that you've got to use an external card on it, but you can get around it. I do find, I think Intel and a lot of the Realtek stuff seems to be pretty compatible, but I don't know. Going to somewhere like Linux Hardware or something.org and seeing what other people use, you can get a pretty good feel of what the majority of people are using out there in the world. So. And Intel certainly is very popular in that area. With Linux, at least, the hardware compatibility is usually built in. You plug the item in and it'll just go, and there's no driver install, downloading drivers, trying to get these things to work. It'll generally just go, and if it doesn't go, you may be able to find some way of getting some module to make it work, but your mileage may vary there. And as I say, my mouse, of course, which is a bit of an antique. I keep those old G600s going because it's just my favourite mouse, mostly for Guild Wars. It's just perfect for Guild Wars for me. And that one is quite old, and I pull it apart and fix the buttons every once in a while. But I do love it. But it doesn't have any particular driver for Linux. I tend to just program it on my Windows machine, and then it's just got the configuration built into it. So I just set my gains up to use whatever the configuration internal is, because that's pretty much life on Linux sometimes, where some things just don't have the software because the manufacturer chooses not to support it. And really, because that's where it comes down to, if manufacturers aren't supporting it, and generally that's quite often the case, it really is up to some third party, to the actual kernel team or some other application maker to produce the software to run the item, really. It's like VR. I don't have any VR equipment, but I can imagine VR would be a major headache. And I don't even know if VR on Linux would even be a thing at all if it wasn't for Steam and what they're doing. I would hate to think how it would be, but as it is with Steam, I can see that that's going to get better and better. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. I know there are some people doing it, and if you get on the Proton database, you certainly can see that a lot of people have been getting quite good results with it. So one day I may try it, but I have a lot of trouble ever since I had surgery, because I had a blood clot in my brain, and I have a lot of trouble with balance and my eyes not cooperating with each other. So I'm not real good with VR, so I haven't really done anything with that. So we shall see though. And RGB, I've had some very mixed results. On the plus side, you can get something like OpenRGB, which will essentially control all your RGB equipment from the one application, which beats the hell out of Windows, because I have a hell of a time in Windows with RGB, with various different software controlling the different things, and they don't get on, and you get one part working and then the other part's not quite working. You finally get that one working. Sometimes you can get them both working for a while, but then you reinstall one of them, and then all of a sudden, as soon as that one comes on, it takes out the other RGB, and it drives me mad. Open RGB, on the other hand, on Linux, is all from the one source. Unfortunately, whenever I try it on my Linux box, most of the gear that I have that's RGB does not seem to be supported by Open RGB yet. That includes the RAM I have in there at the moment, which just does its own thing. And I did try an RGB keyboard. I think it was Corsair K60. Doesn't seem to work, but I do believe the K70 does. So yeah, your mileage may vary there, and that's something that will possibly change too. That's one thing about it, is you can always hope that somebody's going to add your hardware to the application in time, and until then you have some ugly flashing lights on your keyboard. I don't actually use it on my Linux. I've just got some Microsoft budget keyboard there, but I've got the RGB on my Windows, which gives me hell too, so you can hardly win with RGB. And I know that a lot of people have trouble with specific items, streaming equipment, and you are really going to have to make sure you've researched what you're using in those cases. Like my Canon camera, you know, I can't use that as I can't easily use it as a webcam on Linux. On Windows, I could just plug that in on the USB, and there's a application I can use that will allow me to use that as a webcam. But Linux, that's not going to be the case. I mean, obviously you could do specific searches for your items, and I've had pretty good luck with that. I look up particular items that I'm worried about, and I will look them up directly. But there's also places like linuxdrivers.org, which has a list of a lot of resources that will come in handy. linuxhardware.org, where you can see what other people are running and whatnot. So I'll put some of those links down below. But generally you will find the information, good news or bad, that you're looking for. And like I say, if you're actually going out to buy specific things to work with a Linux system, then you're going to find something that's going to work. If it's something you already got, that may be more of a problem, although chances are if it's a common item, it's going to work, or it might in the future. So there's always hope with Linux, at least, and if it does start working, it'll just be very easy to get going. But this hardware issue and some of these items are one of the, and not just another reason why I'm quite happy to keep Windows machines and Linux machines going. So if I do have particular items that require a Windows machine, especially if it's a Windows machine just to do some of the setting up, and then I can use them on other machines, well, that's another good reason to keep Windows machines around, plus the fact they're for gaming anyway. If I suddenly went out and bought a bunch of VR gear, chances are it's going to be used on the Windows machine anyway, because that tends to be where I play most of the games anyway. So it's not something I would likely get for a Linux machine, at least not at this stage, and I know some people do. I just probably wouldn't. Because I really prefer having my Linux machine just there as my production machine and for doing the serious work. So in my experience, it's generally not a problem, especially for conventional hardware, everyday hardware that you're going to use for your production work. There are going to be specific items, especially when it comes to streaming, and even, you know, the normal things that YouTube might use. But generally, it's not that big a deal for most people, and it's certainly not something that should stop people using, or at least trying, Linux. Subscribing and liking means more fluff.